In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Just want to make sure that the streaming is up. We will begin our talk on virtues and the unseen warfare, power over the passions, and we're just getting some technical stuff worked out, and we'll start that momentarily. And do you want two mics or one mic is good?
One mic is fine. Okay. Huh?
What's up?
Are we streaming? Yeah. Way to add the pressure, George. All right. So we're going to be continuing the book and focusing on chapter 5 today. And in a full moment of confession, this chapter, at least for me, was very heavy. One that I quickly called Sam and said, Sam, save me. And so I'm extremely grateful for him to be by my side. I said we'll be the Batman and Robin duo. He'll be Batman, of course, and I'll be Robin. But why don't we go through a quick summary of chapter 4 in normal Sam style that I so appreciate, and then we can dig into chapter 5.
Yeah, one of the things that came out of chapter 4 is that the goal of the Christian life is this ongoing struggle. That the essence of the Christian life is never retreating, never putting your weapon down, the weapon being faith in God, prayer, and that unchecked passions will inevitably lead to slavery. And so what we're fighting for is always, we're fighting for freedom, to be truly free. And therefore perseverance is key. I had mentioned last time about this contemporary priest that said one of the most challenging things in the Christian life is bearing with your own self. And so if you're making an effort, you realize that failure is a large part of the spiritual life. This is very different from someone who says, like if you repeat the same sin twice, somehow you're disqualified or you're not making progress. That isn't really how progress is evaluated. And then we talked about last week the 4 different types of sins, right? That there's sin by commission, sin by omission, sin by weakness, and sin by neglect. And so if I lie and you say, you lied about this, I go, oh, okay, grow up, everybody lies, who cares, it's just a lie. I'm denying that this is a sin. I'm justifying that this is a sin. I'm excusing it. That's where there's no progress. But if I say, but if I turn to God and I say, God, in those moments I'm just so weak and I lie because I'm being a coward and I don't want to lie. We're still clinging to Christ. We're still sort of moving toward Him despite of lack of evidence that we're actually achieving anything, and that's a sign of faith, and so that's a good thing.
We also spoke about fighting fire with fire. So if you want to, because that ties heavily into chapter 5, so if you want to give us a little on that one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that come up not just in this book, but in many spiritual books is this idea that, we're not going to turn to sin and go, I don't like this sin, I'm not going to do this sin anymore. That's sort of, it's an unrealistic expectation. So we talked about St. Porphyrius last week, who says you can't attack sin head on or evil head on. You fight the fire of temptation with the fire for the love of God. And so, St. Porphyrius is big on saying, focus on the Psalms, focus on church attendance, focus on searching out Christ and Christ's teaching and the gospel. Those are the things that will move your heart towards goodness. Rather than saying, I want to stop lusting, I want to stop stealing, I want to, and just sort of, you have this desire, but it's incomplete because you're trying to resist it sort of independently of grace.
And because I'm a very visual person, the one picture that Sam had in the prior presentation that was extremely, at least for me, impactful, I want to share it with you guys here, was this one here. And I think it kind of, at least to me, it spoke to about fighting fire with fire. If you look at kind of the arm on your right-hand side, I think that kind of resembles like my arm, a weak, feeble arm. And then if you look at like the arm coming from the devil on the left-hand side, a very muscular arm, one that's full of power, but yet you put that fire of God in the middle and you're able to resist it. And if you notice, again, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's kind of how my brain works. The arm on the right is not even flexed. It's very relaxed. It's not even like putting up a very strong fight, but it just goes to show that your willingness and you putting the attempt combined with God's power and what it can do. So again, I thought that was pretty neat. All right, so we'll go into any questions. I want this to be interactive because of A, my weakness, and B, I will get a little bit more confident if you guys speak. If you don't, I'm gonna start mumbling and it's not gonna be pretty. So please.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you, I like you already. Come to in the front, please. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So as I was going into this whole chapter 5, Power of the Passion, again, I'm going to repeat, it was a very heavy, heavy, heavy chapter. I was thinking to myself, well, what is, and I'm going to need the notes, but you're going to have them here, so let's put this in slideshow mode. I was thinking, well, I mean, what is the definition of passion? So, you know, I was looked at the dictionary, and the definition is strong and barely controllable emotion. And I'm like, aha, I mean, that's kind of where the threat or the danger or the issue comes, is the fact that it's barely controllable, right? But then I followed by asking myself, well, is all passion bad? And as, you know, I was thinking to myself, not necessarily. Someone can have a passion for Christ, someone can have a passion for helping others, like many saints, someone can have a passion for feeding the poor, but then Sam clarified to me that, well, yes, that could be a passion. That's not obviously the passion that's being discussed and focused on here. And so it's important for a distinction to happen in terms of the passion. And I think you said it nicely when we're sitting on the table. It's more of an innate, like, physical one, right?
Yeah, like so when we're thinking about passion, the root word here is pathos, where we get pathology. We say something deviates from the norm. And so, for example, like anger is a sin, but underneath anger is zealous, like to be zealous for good. You know, you see someone hurting someone else, you can be angry. Underneath that anger is a sort of protection. And so it's good that you feel protective over someone, but how you express that could become revengeful, you know, like in the story of Moses and killing the Egyptian and so on. And so the passion becomes sort of a distortion of a good thing. And we're trying to reorient ourselves, taking whatever passions we have, we're trying to redirect them toward their proper end, towards the good desires that are in us.
Also, I think there's an element of chronic, like it's not something, a
Yes.
passion is not something that just comes randomly. A passion is something that is chronic, and in the fact that it always manifests itself in your life almost on a daily basis. And so that is a big part of the definition. So we're gonna be talking about how to fight these passions, preparing yourself and what might happen, how might I feel, how do I wanna respond, leaning away versus towards, and getting rid of the initial cause or the seed, or what's actually the first step in such passion.
And it sounds like also, you know, the author is saying you want to start with the most prominent, predominant sin in your life, which means that we have to have like a serious encounter with ourselves. Because one of the ways that we protect against shame, like if I struggle with lust or lying or anger, shame doesn't allow me to want to encounter that. So I could just spend a lot of time blaming others. I could talk about the circumstances that allow me to do that. Or I could confront that this is a real weakness for me. This is a sin that I need to really confront in my life. And so he talks about like prioritizing that recurrent sin, that passion, as the thing that you're really wanting to focus on.
One thing that came to my mind again when I was looking into this is the seriousness of it, and something that should be forefront of our mind. For those who had the blessing of going to the monastery a few weeks back when we all went as a group, if you recall the talk that was given to us by the monk, he said that when you go into the Lenten season, take a particular virtue and let that be your goal, focus on it, work on it throughout the Lent, and perfect it to the best possible degree. And I asked the question, well, what's a good first virtue to tackle? And he, without missing a beat, was saying seriousness. Be serious. Be serious about your spiritual life. Be serious about what you're doing. And that plays heavily into what we're about to talk about, which is, do not take any of this lightly. This needs to be attacked full on. It needs to be with a very solid plan. And again, and when Sam were contemplating, I truly think this, you need to plan as if you're going into war. The famous saying in the corporate world too, it says like, you need to, if you fail to plan to fail, right? And that can be more true here as well. But yeah, so there's going to be a heavy focus on bodily passions in this section of the book.
So one of the things that he brings up is considering first the state of the sin. Is this something that's an occasional thing that happens, or is this a recurrent thing for you? And one, to think about the cause which gives birth to the temptation, right? So it might be like, if it's work related, maybe there's someone that you constantly feel very judgmental, resentful toward, and have a lot of anger, like consuming anger towards this person when you're at work. Or it may be sort of, there's a friendship that begins to be sort of, there tends to be sort of blurred boundaries around the friendship, which we could talk a little bit more about that. But he's saying, like, when you wake up, you sort of, not in an obsessive way, but in a mindful way, sort of plan out your day. Like, if you are going to be going to work, you're going to meet this person who maybe the relationship, there's some blurred boundaries around that, or maybe there's a lot of anger and resentment towards that person. He's saying, like, take some time to think about what you might experience, how you might feel, how you're naturally wanting to react to that, and then how do you want to react to that. I think we were going to say something about Shirley Glass
Yes.
at this point.
Yes,
Yeah?
exactly. I was going to remind
do
you.
you
No,
wanna-
go for it.
Sometimes, like in the church, when we talk about boundaries and boundaries between males and females, people sometimes are like, oh, you guys are Egyptian and you're sort of backwards and all that stuff. Shirley Glass is a clinical psychologist who did a lot of work with couples. For 20 years, she worked with couples who experience infidelity. And she was really big on listing sort of boundaries for married couples. And one of those boundaries is, she says, if you're going out with a coworker and you think that coworker is attractive, you should not go out with that coworker alone. This is a secular psychologist, not Christian, sort of. And saying, another thing that Shirley Glass says is that if you're confining in a friend about marital problem, that friend needs to be a friend of the marriage, right? And so you don't go, and this is, and by the way, from my experience, from hearing from people, this is sort of how emotional affairs sometimes happen, right? Someone will go and confine in a coworker, and that coworker is very emotionally supportive, and then the sort of feelings begin to develop for the coworker. And so both the author of the book and Shirley Glass are saying, like, you need to be cognizant of these things and set sort of boundaries for yourself around potential temptations.
I think another strong one too is to avoid idleness and laziness at all cost. What's the saying? An idle mind is the devil's playground. And so another thing to be mindful of, though, as I look around, I think, we're all crazy busy, and so lucky for us that that's probably not something that plays much into it, but also food for thought.
And the last point probably on the slide is, he says, never disobey your spiritual teachers or spiritual fathers. I had to add in there, in the Lord, because we should have obedience, and our well-being is going to be dependent on our obedience to someone else. This is just like a rule, that our spiritual growth is going to be dependent on our obedience to someone else, because God wants to break our self-will, our ego, and that's how it happens. But it has to be in the Lord. There's another spiritual writer that I mentioned last time, Ignatius of Brinchenov. He says, you're not liable to follow a spiritual father who commands you to do something that's against the commandments of God, or against the general teaching of the church. Sometimes this gets dicey, but for most of us, I think it's fair to say that if our spiritual father says, I don't think you should do this, or I think you should, pray this way, or I think you should do this, or don't pray in that way, I think there's sort of a general rule to not create your own agenda and follow that. Skip?
Well, you kind of spoke to this, but you want to add anything to this one?
No, I mean, last week I referenced Saint Joseph the Hesychist, but I didn't remember his name, so this is the one who I was referring to. Yeah, so he died in 1959. He was canonized in 2020. And so this is a modern saint who had like a story like Saint Anthony, right? For 8 years he was in his cell, and he battled, against lust. And one day he was sort of like beaten on the ground, and Christ appears to him, and he gives him the gift of chastity, and it's a gift. And he says that after that he didn't make distinction really between male and females. They were just sort of people to him. But he has this thing about being persistent. As the attacks are persistent, our clinging to Christ has to be equally persistent. He has this saying, spill your blood and receive the Spirit.
I mean, even in the very first couple of verses in this chapter, it says, take up arms against this one particular passion and struggle to overcome it. And I think the word struggle shouted at me that it's not going to be pleasant, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be a walk in the park. It's going to be an ongoing struggle. And as this monk here as an example took 8 years of a struggle for it to kind of be addressed and resolved. Okay, so as we go deeper into this, kind of again, here's part of the plan, right? Don't judge those who commit sexual sins. And now, again, as I was discussing this with Sam, I thought this was interesting, because I am picturing us in our professional life, right? We are out and about. We all know people who are committing sexual sin, but we still treat them with love and respect and cordially, right? Especially in our professional setting. But I wonder sometimes if we bring these same people into this church, how we would then treat them, right? I think, maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but as a community, as a society, this is something that we need to work on, is that we look at that particular sin as extra dirty, as extra bad, as extra shameful. And it's dangerous. It's very dangerous to start, judging. I recall when I was younger, it was very easy for me to fast. I did not struggle per se with it. And I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who never fasted. And I judged him. And again, in a full moment of confession, I was thinking, how do you call yourself a Christian when you don't fast at all? And I swear it, from that day forward, I think God removed the grace of how easy it was for me to fast. Just to show me, like, hey, this is not your own doing, this is not. And ever since then, fasting has been extremely difficult for me. And it's not something that I unfortunately lost that, and I'm struggling with it to get it back. I see you, Miranda.
I said it's because I don't know who cooks you up.
But you know, when Mina brought that up, we judged him. He said, if you want God to answer your prayer almost within 24 hours, there's a couple things that you can do. Number one is ask God, show me where my sin lies. And there's no delay in that prayer. He will show you, like within a day, 2 days, you will know. That other thing is almost like a quick response by God. Like you see someone coming into the church and you judge them as bad, as not good enough, it's almost like a 24-hour response that it will be made evident to you that you're falling into similar sin, if not worse. And so this is what the author here was saying, that God will measure out a painful punishment by letting us fall into the very sin.
I think also the very last point here is don't be overly confident. A lot of people can potentially gain a spiritual level where they say, you know what, I got this. Like I'm strong enough. I'm gonna fight this. If this happens, I know exactly what to do. And that's extremely dangerous. I mean, the only example I know in the Bible, and maybe there's more, but the one I know where someone actually beat the temptation of lust is Joseph. And how did he do it? He did it by running away. And there is no other way. There is absolutely no other way. And so do not be confident in yourself in trying to fight it. Flee and run.
So then he goes into reasons for temptation in general, and he lists external and internal reasons. And so maybe we could go to some of those.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to go through this list, but as you go through it, some of them might be obvious, some of them might be some of them might be back to the point like, oh, you're being super old school and like me'athil, if there's an English translation for that, like very close-minded, but so undisciplined eyes, of just letting it be anything that I see, anything I do, anything that crosses my mind, it's not a big deal. Sweet words, that might be another trigger. Songs that delight the ear and excite the senses by their content or melody. Fine garments, smells or perfumes, suggestive behavior and conversation, physical touch, and dances. Again, it all comes back to the initial point of you're going into war and you need to have a plan. You need to have a plan as you go into this because it is very, very serious. And so as I was kind of sharing with Sam and almost confessing as well, like I like some earthly music from time to time, and the content might not be the best for it. And it is something that even though you think, oh, I'm just, I'm enjoying the beat or enjoying the song, it is something that over time can linger in you and something that can cause damage. And it's definitely something I'm working on, but.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because, someone might say, oh yeah, I don't struggle with sexual thoughts or say that's gross. But sweet words might be a temptation for you, that even in sort of conversations with others, again, boundaries might be blurred and you may not be able to put appropriate boundaries up, and it almost kind of becomes almost a form of infidelity. And so we don't judge that, or we don't judge that, but we recognize that we need to have a gate around our hearts.
Now, as we switch things to like internal causes, let's kind of go through that list. So ease and comfort of the bodily desires to find full satisfaction, unwholesome sexual thoughts, memories of things seen, heard, or experienced in the past, and evil spirits. Again, these are a little bit more, what's the right word? Straightforward, and they definitely make sense. And these things are like things we definitely have to fight. And they go back to having a plan. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but if you have a plan as, okay, you wake up in the morning, again, this is what the author is saying. I'm going to go through my day in kind of like an fashion and say, okay, I'm going to experience this. I'm going here. Normally I meet this person, and when I meet this person, I think of this, and when I think of this, causes me to, fall into this temptation. If you go through that day and you have that plan in your mind, okay, well, now I want to alter that behavior, and so instead of walking this way to my desk, I'm going to walk that way, or instead of thinking this way, I'm going to particularly focus on the fact that he or she has been nice to me and brought me my coffee, whatever it may be, that plan of altering the interaction so that you can have a different result. Yeah.
What does he mean by ease and comfort of the body?
Ease and comfort of the body.
Yeah, I mean, probably, like if a person allows themselves to take things to the full measure as you indulge in oversleeping, overeating, over-relaxing, that he's saying, especially from sort of someone who's trying to live a celibate life, that you know, sexual desires will arouse from that. We're gonna sort of geek out on this a little bit. We're gonna talk a little bit more,
Yes.
more about this because I think it's cool. But I know men that would give up their left arm to give up lust and to give up like sexual impulses. And I was thinking, why is it sort of the Desert Fathers sort of group together like pride, gluttony, and lust together? And I'm like, well, is everybody who fall into fornication or adultery prideful? Is there always like this direct correlation? I mean, sometimes. So I wanted to look into the Desert Fathers. So you have someone like Evagrius who says that despondency, so despondency is not necessarily depression, but the way they use it is like irritability, discontent, almost like in Arabic it's like arfan. You know, you have someone walking out and you're like, what's wrong? You're like, I don't know, I just feel like arfan. This is sort of what despondency means, right? So he says that the demon of despondency instills a hatred for ascetical life, the neglect of prayer and sloth and the psalmody. From this neglect, lust is born, and the soul rushes to bodily gratification. And so he's discontent, he's irritable, he doesn't want to pray, and he says from that is born bodily gratification as a remedy for its sorrow. Yeah, and then other church fathers they'll correlate lust and anger together. So this is sort of a interesting pairing, you know, gluttony and lust, anger and lust, pride and lust. I wanted to sort of also look at it from like a neurobiological level, like what happens in the brain that links these things together. And
May I share a story before you geek
yes,
out?
yes.
Because this is kind of correlated. I recall when I was young, it must have been, I don't know, 18, 19. I remember a particular bishop coming to our church and sharing with us that the church in its ultimate wisdom is why, because there was a question came up, it's like, why are we so big on fasting? We're fasting Wednesday, Friday, this, Lent, and all these different seasons. Is that the church in its ultimate wisdom is trying to get you to have control of the strongest desire in your body. Lust is not the strongest desire in your body, but the desire for food is the strongest desire. And only when you have control over that particular desire can you then begin the journey of having control of almost every other desire. And so it's definitely not by coincidence and not just because we hate lahma or anything like that, you know what I mean? It's by the fact that this is the strongest thing, and you get that pinnacle and you reach there and you conquer that, everything else becomes a relative piece of cake. But now as we go into geeking out more deeper into science.
Well, what I think is really cool is that there's a place in the brain, sort of towards the midbrain, the hypothalamus. It produces hormones that regulate mood, hunger, thirst, sexual arousal, and sleep. And hence why the church fathers, they loop together despondency, gluttony, and lust. Because the part of the brain that's necessary for impulse control, self-regulation, is in the prefrontal cortex. And so it's almost like they really were understanding that there is a specific region of the brain that clusters sort of these sins together. And I just think it's fascinating and probably should do
Research.
more research on this. But I don't know, I just wanted to include that.
Isn't it true that it takes roughly 21 days to break habits or form new? I don't know.
Yeah, so I've heard that, and I've heard the 90 days. I think like in any sort of, in any addiction treatment, like 90 days is a good goal for people to have. And usually like 3 years, there's good research that suggests like 3 years is necessary to, for neuroplasticity to work in order to rewire brain circuitry. And so if there's a behavioral pattern, like if, you know, if I wake up, yell at my kid, and then, you know, I don't know, go outside and smoke a cigarette, and I do this like every day for 17 years, you know, I yell at someone, my stress hormone elevates, I go smoke, and then I drink and whatever, there's a pretty good brain circuitry that is going to be very, very difficult for me to stop. So at least in 3-year period, I can begin to, on a neurobiological level, change that wiring through new behavior sequence. So I don't know if 21 days may do it if it's something that I do sort of intermittently, superficially. But if it's a well ingrained, like we talked about, passion, it's something that is just a recurrent behavioral thing that I've been doing for years. It's going to take some time. That's why I don't like when people say, well, if you fall in the same sin, that you're not really serious, because when you're speaking generally to people, it could be that someone has had this passion, this sin that they've been struggling with since childhood, and God is going to allow them to struggle with until the day of their funeral. And that is part of their Christian life. That is part of their ethos, that this is how they're going to fight for Christ.
Okay, we touched this one, right?
Yeah.
All right, so then as we go into fighting temptation and the how behind it, right? So I mentioned before is the fleeing from it. I added this last point here in the back end of point 1, because earlier today I took Toby and Becky to a car show, and as we're walking through the different cars, one of the cars turned on and had a very loud exhaust, and almost instantly Toby ran and held onto my leg. And I'm like, this is how we should be when we face temptation. It's this instant running to run and hold on to Christ's leg, or figuratively speaking, and to have him be the one who fights the temptation for us. And then in this book, again, the author does mention that when you fall into this temptation, grab a cross, look at the cross, start kissing the cross, picture yourself under that cross. And it is it's a type of running to Christ. And so me being a very visual person, that kind of stuck with me. So again, if that's something that's gonna work for you, have a cross on you. Have a cross on you, and then when and if that happens, pull it, contemplate, kiss it, embrace it, as it says here. And do not oppose the thought, rather shift your attention. And so again, as I was mentioning to you guys the story about Joseph running away from the temptation, that's something to contemplate.
I also really like this idea of fighting lust with affection. It's again like reorienting. The idea of lust is sort of using somebody else for self-gratification, whereas in affection is the affection someone would give towards an icon or a cross is a genuine affection toward connecting with this other person. So I really love that he put that in this chapter. I think it's beautiful.
It's like the reverse direction of the force, as opposed to someone giving to us, we're giving to others.
Yes.
Saint Bernard.
So this was an example of like how the saints sort of, some of the saints used sort of spiritual imagery to overcome lust. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux says, the bridegroom hung upon the cross with arms outstretched, waiting for his bride. There he consummated the marriage by giving his body for her ransom and his blood for dowry. And so, again, it's all, you know, some of the saints, like in the Catholic Church, often will talk about Christ consummating the marriage with the human soul on the cross. It's the full revelation of love, and I think that's a powerful way of transforming lust by that kind of love.
All right, so as we start to wrap things up, kind of the last thing is negligence, and like so now, this is again from the book, now is in our hands, but tomorrow is in the hands of God alone. And so as you think of that, I think the way I took this is a reflection of concentrate on what's happening now. Concentrate and focus on the battle that you're in. Again, this is a war, right? And virtue in the unseen warfare. This is a battle that you need to focus on. And so as you continue to fight that battle today, that's going to be the only way that you can see tomorrow, and then let that be in God's hands and for Him to assist you at that point. He who gave you this morning has not promised you this evening as well. Yeah. I think that's...
Yeah, I think that does it for this chapter.
Questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns? Heavy chapter. You missed a heavy chapter.
It's recorded.
It's recording. I wish it wasn't. It's heavy. Yeah.
I think it requires really a great deal of awareness with everything that we're doing. And personally for me, I find this to be the hardest thing as the day go by. And yes, you're saying we're busy, and that might be a good thing. I feel actually sometimes it takes away from us being aware and checking in with everything that we're doing to get to that moment. So,
Yeah, I mean, when the author was saying, like, wake up in the morning and start picturing your day and put a plan, I'm like, I've never thought of that
I
idea.
wake up in the morning when we're in school.
Yeah.
And waking kids even at wake up.
Yeah. Wake up in the morning is the most stressful time. It's probably a majority of the sins exist at that time.
Dana,
Yes.
so I didn't know you were doing the thing today,
Uh-huh.
so I apologize for all the comments I made this morning as far as the coffee about the drop that poured was super hot.
I forgive you. That's good. Don't worry, there's parts of that talk or that experience in the morning that made its way in the talk.
Yeah, I can see the body comments first. I'm joking.
2 more minutes. Any other questions?
Who's doing next chapter?
Yeah, Nether and Mar.
Nether and Mara doing next chapter. And then? Who's doing after that? Do you know? Or are you looking for volunteer?
I think George is doing the week after.
Only one George is here. Awesome. Thank you guys.